Good morning. I've got some magazines here that we are going to deliver when we visit our three grandsons who live in Cardiff on Saturday. And, we love, I guess, grandparents, I love to spoil their grandkids, but it's not so much spoiling, but love to see the delight in their faces when they get a gift. Earlier this week, Jess was talking about we've got mail and that sense of God gifts and the delight that we can have in them. And today is my second part of what I call soap. I said I do my soap with you in 5 minutes. And what I've done is I've come down to the place I normally come to. Me to spin this around a bit. I sit in this chair in this little section of our house, and I've got a cup of tea. I've warming my heart up. Sometimes it may be some worship music. At the moment I'm reading this book, so I read a page about we don't know God completely. He's unknowable in that sense. He's knowable, but he's a God of infinite mystery, but we have a sufficient knowledge. That was just a thought that took me into scripture. And then I read 2 chapters. One chapter was pretty tough going. It was about Ammon and how he raped his half-sister. There's still an awful lot we can learn from that, but it wasn't the sort of uplift. And it wasn't a particular word I felt God had for me this morning. But then I read in 2 Corinthians 6, and I'm going to read a verse with you in a moment. So S stands for scripture. So this is the scripture I read this morning. 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 1. As God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of my favour I heard you. In the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favour. Now is the day of salvation. So the scripture, that was the S that I wrote. And I've got my little journal here. Now, since I was 18 years old, I've been journaling, which is more than a diary. It's just the thoughts that I have as I live life before God. And sometimes it's in a hardback journal. At the moment, I'm using my journal on my iPad here, using something called Day One. And it's great. So I've got it on my phone here. So I'm going to tell you what I wrote this morning as I read that. So this is what it says in the New Living Translation. It says, as God's partners, we beg you not to receive that marvellous gift of God's kindness or his grace and ignore it. And I wrote down under O. So my observation, that's my scripture. That's what the scripture I felt God was speaking to me this morning. My O was this. That's the O. In the chapter before, in chapter 5, Paul has been talking about living by faith and not by sight, and that we have a home ahead. My battery went low there. I hope that doesn't interrupt, but we'll come back to it in a second. And we're living now in a temporary world. We're going to hear more from Nathan next week on that. And we're living, if you like, in God's waiting room or God's fire of heaven. That's what our life on this earth is. And he tells them in chapter 5 that he says, make it this goal in your life, this ambition in your life, that in this fire, in this tent, in this waiting room, we live to please God. And we'll think more about that next week. So please come back next week. Instead, he says, I want you to live as representatives. Lift your head up. You're an ambassador of Christ. And then he comes to this verse at the end of chapter 5, beginning of chapter 6. He says, don't receive this marvellous gift of God's grace in vain, or better translated, don't receive the grace of God uselessly. I love how the Message paraphrase it. Don't squander one bit of this marvellous life God has given. God reminds us, I heard your call in the nick of time. The day you needed me, I was there to help. So 2 thoughts from that I got. One is God's side is pouring grace and love and mercy. Just like Jess's thought a couple of days ago. These gifts that he pours into our lives. That's God's side. My side is not to waste it. Don't receive this life, this grace, this favour. Don't receive it uselessly. Make a conscious effort today to grow one baby step forward in my love and walk and relationship with God. S, observation, scripture, observation. My application, this is what I wrote. So make the most of today. That's my application. Serve God in everything because you love him. He is your life. Squeeze every ounce of God's life out of today. Whether working, resting, And may God smile be on your life today, his grace. My prayer, and this is where I end. I wrote a little prayer at the top. I always entitle my soap, and the soap I entitled today was "Don't Squander One Bit of This Marvellous Life." And this is my prayer that I simply wrote. Let me pray it with you this morning. Father, please help me not to receive your marvellous life, your kindness, love, grace, uselessly. Help me today instead to revel in your grace. There's nothing more I can do to make you love you more, make you love me more or less. Help me today to live and serve in your grace, though I trip up today and wander and stumble and make mistakes and most of the time forget you. Draw me back into your embrace. Forgive me in advance for my inattention and the upset and grief I know I will cause you and others. Help me not to squander one bit of this marvellous life you have given. Help me to squeeze every drop of joy, peace, presence, wonder, awe, connection with others and building up of others out of today. And I start today knowing I can't, but you can. You never said I could, but you always said I would.